Cosatu's calling on Parliament to do the right thing against what they call delinquent MPs. Among the trade unions' concerns is the nomination of MK Chief Whip John Hlophe, disgraced a former Western Cape judge president, as a delegate to the Judicial Service Commission. The JSC found him guilty of gross misconduct in August 2021. Matthew Parks is Cosatu Spokesperson and joins us now for this conversation. Matthew, appreciate your time. Always good to speak to you. Delinquent and members of Parliament is not often said in the same phrase.
Well, sadly, in the past decade, we've actually seen it become more and more of a common occurrence. And, look, we appreciate members of Parliament are human beings, they're not angels. But I think society and workers have a right to expect the best behavior from these people. Our members of Parliament are privileged to lead. They're entrusted by society to lead on their behalf, to pass laws, to set in place the laws that govern our behavior, including criminal conduct. They are entrusted to hold government accountable, to pass budgets, even to amend budgets. And if you have persons of very dubious moral standing occupying such offices and struggling to behave within the common norms of adulthood, if you have people who, like we've seen with Ronaldo Host from the Democratic Alliance, trending on social media for inciting violence against black people. We've seen another MP from the MK party, Andile Mutama, also have been found wanting by the Equality Court, but also inciting hate speech and violence against white people. We've seen the Electoral Court this week issue or find guilty a new MK MP, Vishwan Reddy, who also became notorious during the elections for threatening civil war and violence unless his political party was elected to office. And of course, Zizi Kodwa was just sworn in despite being on trial for corruption. So for us, it's despairing. Society has paid the price of a parliament which turned a soft or blind eye to state capture, to corruption, which allowed its own members to run amok in the legislature, in government, and in society. And the consequence was state capture, collapsing SOEs, load shedding, cable theft, collapsing municipalities and public services. Workers paid the price with rising unemployment levels, rising poverty and inequality levels. Society had to pay the bill. So I think for us, Parliament has got to pull up its socks. We're not even 1 month into this term, and already we're finding about 4 MPs who are just struggling to abide by common adulthood, common principles, let alone respect for the Constitution. So I think from our side, Parliament needs to strengthen its code of conduct, its rules. It should hold without fear or favour all of its MPs across party lines accountable, and when they misbehave, show them the door, sanction them, suspend them, dock their salaries. But also I think for us, it'll be a moment of shame if you have a former judge who was impeached by the Judicial Services Commission being elected by Parliament to go and sit on that very same Judicial Services Commission and to appoint and oversee judges. That can't be right. We cannot treat Parliament like a circus. This is a serious institution, and political parties need to deploy people who are serious, and those people can't behave. Those political parties must take action. And the parties themselves lack a moral compass to do so, then Parliament must also exercise its responsibility on behalf of society. But
Matthew, I like the issue that you raised around the importance of parties having, or should, have a moral compass that allows them to deal with issues. So in the one part, you're calling upon Parliament to deal with what you've called delinquent members of Parliament. Now, one of your alliance partners is the ANC. You've talked about Zizi Kodwa, who's now a parliamentarian. Let's talk about the conversation that you've had with your own alliance partner around an individual such as Zizi Kodwa.
We raised it directly with our ally, the ANC. We raised it before he was sworn in as a member of Parliament to advise him, to plead with him not to do so. We've raised it afterwards as well, privately and publicly, and we'll continue to raise it because it's wrong. We don't celebrate the misfortune of anybody. I personally have known Zizi Kodwa for many, many years as a good person, but the reality is that he's facing trial for a very serious issue of corruption. The ANC has taken a very good stance, saying that its public representatives must step aside when they are charged. Now, when we hear from the ANC an equivocation to saying, well, step aside, but continue to participate, doesn't make sense. Society wants to hear black and white that we are serious against crime and corruption. We want to hold public representatives to a higher standard, because being a member of Parliament is not being an employee. The labour laws don't apply per se to MPs. We think the ANC, it was very bold and progressive to say step aside, and it needs to implement that without fear and favour, because if it backtracks on one individual's case, or if it equivocates or fudges the notion, future MPs who will be found wanting, and we're sure there are some, will then be able to say, well, on what basis are you holding us accountable if you have not done the other one? So I think for us, the ANC needs to revisit it. We'll continue to raise it. But look, I think to be fair, they have made good progress on it. But for us, the re-swearing in of Zizi Quadra 2.5 weeks after he had just resigned as a minister sent a wrong message, it sent a worrying signal. Are we really serious about this renewal campaign? Are we really serious about the fight against crime and corruption? I think for us, we do hope the ANC will reconsider this decision.
Matthew, how does Cosatu propose Parliament should enforce higher ethical standards?
I think, well, three things. One is that previously Parliament has been really treating this issue with kid gloves. We've seen so many MPs being in trouble, hitting their headlines for the wrong reasons, misbehaving, and Parliament will take months, even years, to process these issues. If they were to issue a sanction, it might be a simple slap on the wrist of 1 month's salary. We think Parliament needs to make a few very brutal examples, expel a few members of Parliament, because that will send a message to the rest of them that if you don't behave, there'll be consequences. The rules, we think, do need to be tightened significantly to take into account, for example, what people do on social media, what they do outside of the House of Parliament itself. We think Parliament would be wise to adopt the ANC's very progressive principle of step aside. Yes, not in law, but again, we need to have Parliament being held to a much, much higher standard than just the simple common law. We do think that with regards to the Judicial Services Commission, there will be a need to possibly amend the Constitution to simply say also that if you've been convicted of a crime, if you have been impeached and so forth, you can't be eligible to serve in that commission. So I think in many instances, the rules, the Constitution, the laws are a little bit silent or grey or vague. And so there is a need to tighten it. And of course, when the founding fathers of the Constitution drafted it, I don't think any of them really imagined would have this kind of chicanery that we often see today playing out in society and in Parliament. But again, this is the moment to do so. Parliament needs to send a very strong signal. We have very good leadership now in Parliament, in the form of the Speaker, Togo Didiza, the new Chief of Dumiseni Ntuli, people of highest integrity. So I think it would be a good start for their term to really crack the whip and send a message to everybody.
Now, what's exciting about this Parliament, and certainly some of the individuals that are in Cabinet as well, is that they're younger members of society. So let's talk about the implications of having some of these members of Parliament in Parliament that you've described as delinquents, some that have been charged with various crimes. I mean, what sort of message does it send to the greater South Africa, to younger South Africans, to those that are aspiring to go into politics?
It sends a very, very worrying message. Yes, a major part of our problems as a society is our unemployment rate, is our low economic growth rates, the shortage of resources and so forth. But equally, we have a problem of morality and ethics. There's no amount of unemployment which can ever justify the levels of gender-based violence we see. There's no amount of socio-economic challenges that can justify the amount of child abuse, rape, etc. that we see. And I think sadly as a society we've begun to normalize criminal activities. We had a minister of police who once tried to explain to the nation that a swimming pool was actually a fire pool. We've seen time and again people explaining all sorts of nonsensical issues simply because they were benefiting it, simply because we normalized corruption, misbehavior. We had at times political parties justifying persons who are on rape trials. So I think we really need to take a step back and to be a little bit more stringent when it comes to issues of morality. Because how do we expect the child on the street or the teenager or the ordinary person on the street to behave if people at the very top are able to get away with bad behavior, criminal behavior, and there's no consequence? In fact, we even just normalize it and we celebrate it. So I think we do really need to set an example. We're at the beginning of the fresh term. There's new challenges, new terrain, so to speak. But it'll be a positive message if Parliament itself can lead from the front.
And finally, your expectations of this 7th Parliament, particularly when it comes to ethics and accountability issues?
I think the major thing is to hold the state accountable, whether it's ministers, whether it's directors general, whether it's the CEO of the state-owned enterprises, or even mayors, to really make sure that when they abide by the law, that they spend their budget, when they misbehave, to hold them accountable. It should not be simply that we wait to see what plays out in the newspapers, we wait to see what the law enforcement institutions do. Parliament itself has got powers. It's got powers to impeach persons. It's got powers to sanction them, to remove them from the legislature, and so forth. And it really needs to exert its authority, irrespective of party line, because if we can do that, then many issues can be addressed. If society and politicians can get the message that they are accountable for how workers' taxes are spent, they're accountable for delivering on their mandates, that'll be a key thing to do so. We've seen, for example, if you just take one institution of the South African Revenue Service, which under previous leadership of SARS, it was the epicenter of state capture and corruption. Tax revenues were plummeting. That had an impact upon the ability of the state to pay nurses and teachers' salaries to invest in working-class communities. Under the new leadership of SARS, appointed by the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, we've seen a fantastic turnaround, investing in additional staff, investing in capacity as well, and has begun to go after tax evasion, especially amongst the wealthy, high-income earners. And we've seen a positive turnaround in that regard. So it shows you if we have ethical leadership, we invest in the quality of the state, we hold people accountable, we can turn South Africa around. But if we continue to normalize delinquency, if we continue to say political vandals are people to be cheered on, then we should not be surprised when things get worse.
Cosatu Spokesperson Matthew Parks, appreciate your time. That was Matthew Parks challenging the 7th Parliament to hold the moral standards of parliamentarians to account.